let me just hit play.
Okay. Good evening, members of the public, members of the planning board, staff of town, and our new council, Ms. Murray. Welcome to the September 8th, 2021 meeting of the Cohasset Planning Board. It is a Zoom virtual meeting. That if you need the link, please go to the town website where the agenda is posted. I'm calling this meeting to order at 6:32 p.m. I'd like to start with a planning board member roll call, starting alphabetically with Clark Brewer.
Clark Brewer here.
Tom Callahan.
Tom Callahan here.
Paul Grady.
Paul Grady present.
Eric Potter.
Eric Potter here.
Amy Glassmeyer here, and Paul Caleri. All right, we weren't necessarily anticipating him. I'd like to recognize our staff, Miss Lauren Lynn, Director of the Planning Department, and Miss Jen Oram, the Assistant Director of Planning Permits and Inspections. Lauren Lynn will begin by explaining to the public how they can participate in the meeting.
Thank you. And just to note, Jennifer Oram will not be joining us here tonight, but we do have Angela Giso from the building department taking our minutes. She's in the attendee section. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Angela.
So thank you. For any members of the public wishing to interact with the board tonight, we ask that you input your name and address into the question and answer function at the bottom of the screen. You can either leave written comments that will be included in the record in that question and answer section, or you can indicate that you'd like to address the board, and we'll promote you so that you can speak and utilize a camera. We ask that all comments are kept to a maximum of 3 minutes and that you do not repeat repetitive information if at all possible. And with that, I will turn it back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to make a brief review of the agenda, and then I'll go through the items. The first item will be the introduction of our new council, Ms. Murray. We will then address a continuance of the public hearing for 808 Chief Justice Highway. We will then reopen the public hearing for a site plan review for 2025-30 in Situate Hill. And then finally, the meeting will end with the meeting process for the public will be completed with an informal discussion with the applicant and representatives of the 55 South Main Street property. So with that, I'd like to introduce Ms. Carolyn Murray, who will give us just a brief introduction about her professional experience.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And it's a pleasure to meet all of the board members, even though it may only be virtually for now. Eventually, I hope we will be meeting in person. Last month, our firm, KP Law, was appointed as town council. And as part of that process, I was selected to be your primary contact for the town of Cohasset, not just for land use matters, but for all matters that the town is going to be handling. For those who may not be familiar with our firm, we have about 45 attorneys and represent about a third of the cities and towns in Massachusetts, either as town council or special counsel. Personally, I have been involved in municipal law since 1994. First I actually worked in-house for a municipality for, I think, about a total of 14 years. Starting out there first as their paralegal and then eventually becoming their in-house counsel after I completed law school. I've also been with KP Law for about 11 or 12 years, and I'm a part of their, one of their shareholders and part of their management committee. I've done as, in-house counsel and both as outside counsel for communities. I've handled everything from labor matters to zoning and land use matters to procurement disputes. But I'd really say that the bulk of my practice over the last several years has focused mainly on land use issues. I think in part as I think a lot of communities have taken a look at revising their zoning bylaws, and I've been involved with some major rewrites of those for other communities. And also as comprehensive permit projects. It seems that after the last the recession of 2008, there was a lot more funding released for 40B projects. So I've spent a fair amount of time over the last few years advising clients on that. In terms of my approach and my assistance of services to the planning board here in Cohasset, I've met with your planning director. I've also met with the chair about a week or so ago and described that however the board feels best to take advantage of my services, we can make that work. I've got some clients that I attend all of their meetings just as a practice, and other clients that only feel the need to invite me to attend meetings when there might be a controversial project or a topic that they feel could use some assistance. I've also got some other clients that almost never ask me to attend any meetings, but I might have standing telephone conversations with either, say, the planning director or the planning board chair, say a few days prior to your meetings, and we would go over applications and any questions that have raised by board members or maybe by abutters since the application was advertised. So I can be very flexible to help the board in any way that you think is appropriate. I know the town manager thought it would be helpful that at least for the first 3 or 4 planning board meetings that I do at least plan to attend those, so that I can get a sense of some of the projects that you're dealing with and start to become a little more familiar with you and the issues. And then I suppose we revisit it after that those 3 or 4 meetings are up to see whether or not that's a practice we feel is important to continue, or maybe we modify it in some way. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Do any board members have questions for Ms. Murray?
No.
All right, well, it may come to pass during Clark Brewer. I can see you're leaning forward.
Yeah, hi, Carolyn, you go by Carolyn?
I do, yes.
Okay, thank you. And, very often a legal issue will come up at a larger special permit thing that the board could benefit from a hip shot answer,
Mhm.
and also a more in-depth answer that you'd say, I'll have to look into that. We definitely have the need for both. With council in the past, sometimes they've taken the conservative route all the time, and sometimes that doesn't get to the heart of the question or the issues that we have with special permits. I wonder if you could elaborate on those sort of 2 kind of deliverables, if you will, as a part of a special permit or site plan review process, and how that's worked well for you in engaging boards' questions, concerns, queries as they come up.
Sure. First, I wanted to say I never try to be the 6th member of the planning board. I fully respect the fact that it isn't up to me to make the decision, nor is it up to me to try to influence the board to vote approval or denial one way or the other. It's ultimately the board's decision. I look at my role is not just to tell you what is legally permissible or what perhaps might have been addressed in some other communities, or maybe might even be referenced in case law. It isn't just to provide you that, but, and I think this comes from having worked as a municipal employee for years. I understand that it isn't just the answer of what you can do, but it's also understanding and being more sensitive to what is it you're trying to do. If you're trying to see your way to approve a project, but somehow or other you feel that we need to shape it a certain way, or we need to consider mitigation, or figure out just how far can, say, the planning board flex its muscles with respect to conditioning a project, I'll help you with that as well. Or I might even say, for example, if the board is inclined to grant this, the board might wish to consider imposing a condition such as, which would, in my opinion, adequately address this concern. I try, and I think that, you know, other clients have told me, have given me some feedback that they find this to be helpful, but I try not to just say, yes, you can, or yes, you must, but also if you're looking for a little bit more, you know, how to get you over the goal line to accomplish it, to try and also answer that. And sometimes I think that just comes from either sitting through some of the hearings where you hear the concerns, not just of the public, but of the board members, or having discussions like with the planning director where we go over, look, this is really, you know, traffic is really the issue here, or, you know, stormwater management, whatever it happens to be, this is really a concern, and the board is trying to figure out, is there a way that we can safeguard against X, Y, and Z happening? Yeah, I try to incorporate those kinds of things into a response, whether it's verbal or writing, so that that helps the board, perhaps, if you're leaning a particular way, to start to frame what this might look like in terms of a decision.
Sure, and thank you for that answer. I'm also wondering if the board is reviewing some aspect of a project and there's something that's critical that we haven't brought up, that nobody's talked about, that is salient in the moment. Would you feel comfortable getting the chair's attention and making a comment, even if you weren't asked for it and nobody knows it's an issue?
I would, and in fact,
Okay.
This may not come up quite as frequently, say certainly say in a site plan review project, but certainly, you know, if there's special permit criteria, and we've all been so focused on, or the discussion has been so focused on these aspects, but nobody has bothered to start to consider some other criteria, and you're required to make findings, yes, I will jump in. Or, you know, with your colleagues on the zoning board of appeals, sometimes you can attend a zoning board hearing and you're not necessarily sure whether they're discussing a variance or a special permit. They're just kind of going through the issues, and somebody has to always bring them back to, this is a special permit, this is a variance, there's criteria, there are findings you're required to make, because last thing you want is an appeal and then a remand, because now you need to make findings consistent with section whatever of the bylaw. So yes.
That's right. And sometimes we need help, not that we spin our wheels, but we would need help with a redirection potentially.
Right.
All right, great. Thank you very much for those comments. Clark, you finished?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So thank you, Ms. Murray. It's great to have you on board, and we'll look forward to working with you. And also, we certainly will confer with you as we move along. I'm now going to move into the formal elements of the meeting, and just simply say that we were notified September 22nd, 2021 by the applicant's engineer that they wanted a continuance for the hearing on 808 Chief Justice Highway. So this hearing will continue to our next meeting, and we will have no deliberation. So moving on to the next item, we're going to
Sure.
Lauren,
I'm sorry, we just need a motion to continue to September 22nd at 6:30 p.m.
so
All
moved.
right.
Seconded.
Let's roll call vote. No, we don't need to do that.
Yes,
So
you
let's-
do.
Yeah, we do.
We do. We need a roll call vote for remote.
and all times. All right, thank you. Clark Brewer,
Clark Brewer, aye.
Tom Callahan,
Aye.
Paul Grady,
Aye.
Eric Potter,
Aye.
Amy Glassmeyer. Aye. All right, thank you. Let's move on to the next item. We're going to be reopening the public hearing for a site plan review for 2025-30 Situate Hill. Lauren, would you like to tee that up?
Certainly, thank you. So we're going to continue this hearing on site plan review. I'm going to be promoting the applicants as well as our peer reviewer right now. We have the applicant Mark Trider. We have Matt Keeley from BHB, Walter Sullivan, the applicant's attorney. We have Chris Nowak also from BHB, which is on the applicant's engineering firm. And we will also promote Sam Gregorio, who's from our peer review firm, TEC Engineering, on behalf of our traffic reviewer. And now if Mr. Trider or whomever wants to speak from the applicant side, if you could just let me know if there's anyone else that is in attendees that should be here to present for you, I would appreciate that.
Yes, we'd like to promote, please, Rob Schwant. I think he should be in attendance as well.
Yes, there is a Rob here.
Do we not have to start this at 6:55 according to the agenda?
So we actually continued all of these hearings to 6:30 p.m. and the specified time was to be determined. So
Okay, that's fine.
you're in the clear. So with that, I'll turn it over to the applicant to make their presentation. After the applicant is completed, giving any and all new information, we'll ask if our peer review traffic engineer has any comments they wish to make, and then I'll turn it back to the chair to begin with member comments.
All right, just by way of introduction, Madam Chair, my name is Walter Sullivan, the attorney for the applicant, Mark Trider, who's already been introduced to the board. And with us also is Rob Schwant, the property owner. I believe also Sevi Strekalowski is or should be on board here. And then as the town planner indicated, Chris Nowak and Matt Healy from VHB. Tom May also from the applicant may be on here as well. At the outset, Mr. Trider would like to offer a few comments and remarks, and then as was indicated, we have had responses to the town peer reviewer, so it might be helpful for the board to hear from them. So with the pleasure of the chair, if Mr. Trider could offer a few remarks.
Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, everyone, for having us for another meeting. I'll be brief. I just really what we're going to do is point to our consultants in the opinions of the consultants on many of the items that we had questions to field related to previous comments. And one thing I just wanted to request tonight was a little bit more of an opportunity to address any comments that are made as they're made. I know you guys have a procedure, and I'm absolutely respectful of that, but I felt that our comments on the fly here, as it related to certain elements of our reports and technicalities or procedural matters or methodologies, we could provide a little bit more color and point out where it was accurate in relation to what your comments were. I think it would have contributed to a bit more of an informative process in terms of what our goals are and what your goals are. So, but anyway, with that, I mean, I'll turn it back over to the team, and namely Chris and Matt, to respond to what the real main issues were, which are traffic really and parking. And we feel that between the two teams of third-party consultants here, we've reached a corroboration, and hopefully we all can recognize that and come to an agreement on that. So thank you.
So Chris, maybe it makes sense for you to go first, just very briefly, as to where we stand with since our last submission. Chris, I believe you're muted.
Mr. Sullivan, may I ask you, are you going to go through the detailed list of responses to our comments? And is that what you're speaking to, Mr. Trider?
We certainly could. It would be lengthy. I think there was 56 items, many of which were no response needed, or we concur. There was a few. I think Chris has a good handle in terms of his conversations with TEC and Sam, and I know Mr. Ellison was on vacation, who had a lot to do with the analysis of the site. But I think Chris can really highlight some of the main items of concern where you guys pointed out the need for clarification or adjustment.
All right, so then we can infer that what you're planning to present is new information that is in response to our previous discussions.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. And maybe Chris, if you want to take it from there.
Sure. I think what we would be happy to do, if you'd like us to, is go through so backing up, we had submitted our original application back in May, I think it was. There was a lengthy peer review conducted by TEC. We received that letter in July. We provided a formal response to those comments on August 19th. And a lot of the comments were technical in nature and required a fairly technical response. And we've submitted backup information to justify our response to TEC's comment. I feel that we've addressed TEC's comments. We haven't received any formal recognition that all comments have been addressed. So I guess what I would suggest is that if there are any additional questions from TEC on the information that we've provided, we'd be happy to answer. I know that the board has also had a chance to review our response. If there's any questions, most of them were related to items that were, or not most of them, but the items that were discussed at the two previous presentations were pretty much covered in this memo as well. I don't think there was anything that was left out. So now that everybody's had 3 weeks or so to review the material, I think it would probably be the best use of everyone's time to just answer any follow-up questions that people have on the information that was submitted.
So you're turning it back over to the planning board then?
Yes, I believe this is our third hearing. We've made 2 presentations and we filed a formal response to the comments. So I don't think we have any new material to present. But we're happy to clarify any of the responses if people still have questions on the issues that we've been discussing for the past 3 hearings.
So Lauren, what's your recommendation here?
So first, let me pause and ask if Sam Gregorio, do you have any comments that you'd like to make at this time?
Sure. I'll just go through at least my part here. Can you hear me? I just want to
Yes,
make
we
sure.
can hear you.
Yeah.
Only because every time on Zoom, I just want to make sure everybody can actually hear what I'm saying. Members of the board and to the community at large, my name is Sam Gregorio. I'm the senior traffic engineer with TEC Engineering, the peer reviewer for the project. And again, just for the general public's knowledge, we are generally working with the town on this project. So we have no general affiliation with the developer itself. I can go over generally the traffic. I know Pete Ellison, who I alluded to earlier, is still going through the site related parts that were put together by VHB in the response to comments a couple weeks ago. But although we haven't developed a formal letter, I would be doing the traffic part of that letter. So I can go over the traffic comments as they sit right now. So although there was a series of comments directly in the traffic study, a lot of them were, as the developer alluded to, no action required. But for the sense of the items that I guess garnered an actual physical response, TC had noted that there might have been a discrepancy in the information provided in the traffic study related to what is applicable on the site in terms of the former MIPA permitting, where there's a storage facility on the site that was actually included as part of the MIPA filing, and therefore generally should be included as part of the traffic study as existing use. Obviously, it's there, but just to note that it is part of the actual property as it sits. That being said, the storage facility does not generate really any substantial traffic. So it's not really going to change anything in the traffic study if it were to be included in its form. I guess the 2 biggest notes in terms of traffic, which were again alluded to earlier, are related to the overall traffic numbers and the parking numbers, which is where TEC had comments related to those. In terms of the overall traffic related to the project, the traffic study does present a conservative amount of traffic generated by the project, as it's using all 28,000 or so square feet as defined for the site, but not all 28,000 square feet are actually office space. Some of it is the general utility space, because each of it is individual buildings as opposed to a normal office building, where you might have a one utility closet or something like that. Each individual building is going to have stuff like that. So the square footage of actual office space is a lot less than the actual square footage presented on the actual site plan. So the traffic numbers generated in the traffic study are based off the total overall square footage as opposed to the net square footage. And I'm sure that will come up at some point, the definition of what the net square footage is in terms of the bylaw, where we're not necessarily needed, or sorry, the developer's not necessarily needed to provide traffic numbers associated with those square footages within the buildings that aren't actually developing traffic. So what we would say is that the trip generation that's presented in the traffic study is probably conservative, even though the use is a little bit different than a normal office facility. And right now, the way the numbers are set is that the worst hour of the day for an office development would be the morning commuter peak hour, same as the general peak hour everywhere else. And at that conservative upper threshold, we're looking at still less than 1 car per minute added to the roadway as a result of the development. And that's probably going to be a lot less, obviously, because it's not actually all office space. So that was somewhat clarified in the VHB response to comment letter. Obviously, we just wanted to make sure that everything was comparable in what the analysis was showing. So in terms of the parking, VHB had noted that they had based their parking off the lower number of office space, the 14,000 or so square feet. TEC doesn't have an objection to that. And that's generally because each individual office space is not going to be big. You're not going to have, 20 employees in each of the different office spaces. It's going to be 1, maybe 2 people, 1, maybe 2 cars that we would normally see for that type of office space. And generally where they are providing I believe it's 80 is the exact number. Correct me if I'm wrong, Matt. But with that number, that would be generally sufficient, and we don't necessarily want to go so much more based on the actual office space provided, because that adds extra payment, which means extra stormwater runoff, which means extra environmental impact for something that's probably, not just probably, but most likely not going to be needed. So we don't necessarily want to cause an environmental impact for something that's not actually going to be actually needed by vehicles that are there. That's not to say that the developer should not provide potential space somewhere on the site for banked parking being grass area that could be converted to parking if needed at a worst case scenario. But in the sense of, as we sit right now, TEC sees that the parking numbers and the way it was responded to by VHB would generally be sufficient based on the overall space that is actually office. TC had noted some comment related to the distribution of traffic as it leaves the site. VHB did respond to that and provided what would generally be the change in the traffic overall if that were the case. It doesn't change the actual number of cars, but how they would enter and exit the site from which direction. VHB's analysis basically shows that if you do it the way TEC was generally recommending, you might have a change in 5 cars going from one approach to another, 5 cars over the course of a worst hour of the day. It does not necessarily change the traffic sufficiently in any form. We do obviously understand that the intersection up front is not the ideal intersection as it sits right now. TEC has been working separately with the town as part of a separate project to look at the corridor as a whole and different options for this intersection and a few other intersections along 3A, based on the amount of traffic being sent through the intersection by the new development. The overall operations of the intersection aren't effectively going to change wholesale. There obviously will be additional delay. There will be potential an additional car, maybe 2 of queue, especially on King Street during that worst hour of the day. But on an overall sense, that would be not so atypical from a stop sign approach to a mainline roadway that most likely will not be necessarily seen. And the reason why we say that is right now, the analysis as put forward by VHB, in the way VHB has described it, TEC will confirm that the gap that a person would generally choose exiting from the driveway onto 3A in the analysis form is much, much higher than a reality condition. So the analysis basically would show about a 6-second gap is what a car would need to exit the driveway. It's much less than in real life, 4.5, 5 seconds. And just a second off of that changes the analysis in large ways. So TEC generally does concur with the analysis results that VHB has presented in terms of the overall traffic and what it would generally mean to add the, say, 53 cars in the morning, 34 cars in the afternoon. And again, that being a conservative amount of traffic based on the entire square footage that they've shown for the 28,000, when actually the office space itself is actually less than that. In terms of the site plan, TEC did have a certain amount of comments related to the transportation aspects of the site plan. One, again, was related to the square footage. We just wanted to make, sorry, my kid's moving. TEC generally provided, wanted GVHB to provide an overall comparison of what the actual square footage for office versus non-office in each of the buildings was. We wanted to make sure that was documented so it was understood why the traffic numbers were what they were in terms of traffic and parking. Overall, in terms of the site, TEC did want to see turning templates for the fire truck, the garbage truck. The garbage truck does easily get to the dumpster and out. The fire truck does be able to circulate the site. There is one leg of the site down by buildings 6, 7, and 8, where the fire truck doesn't have a turnaround capability. That TC doesn't necessarily object to that, but we would leave it to the fire department to determine whether that is sufficient for them. If they are okay, we're okay. Other than that, there was a note for them to coordinate directly with the fire department, VHB, and the developer to make sure that the fire department is on board with all the aspects of the site, including locations of hydrants, fire zones, and again, the circulation of the site by the fire truck. TC just wanted to note that one last item that came with the template, which was the inability to turn around at those particular building locations. In terms of site distance, TEC did note that internal to the site, there's locations on the driveway, within the driveway along the circulation roadway, where site distance would be insufficient based off a normal speed of the roadway. The VHB and the developer have determined that they're going to place a particular advisory speed on the road, and that at that particular speed, I can't find the exact wording of which speed it was on, only because I forget what page it's on, but it's 15 miles per hour. Okay. At that particular speed, which is not atypical for this type of roadway. Obviously, it's windy, it's uphill, it's downhill. So it's not something that's outside what would be normal for this particular type of site. But within that particular design speed of the roadway, the sight lines along the road and the internal circulation would be sufficient. Outside at 3A, there would be potential sightline obstructions looking in and out of the driveway. The developer has, I believe, committed to, or at least TC's recommendation would be to have the developer provide any kind of trimming of vegetation that would be inside the public right of way or on their particular site property that would help extend those sight lines from the driveway down 3A to make sure that it is longest as possible. Obviously, it's an existing condition there. The roadway is there now. The subdivision roadway has, I believe, been approved in the sense that it's obviously there. So the sightline is an existing condition, being insufficient. Now, obviously, we are adding traffic to that, so we do want to make sure that it is as long and as capable as possible in each direction, which is where that tree trimming and other vegetation trimming comes in. Other than that, the only other, I guess, major note that TEC did bring up was the pedestrian capabilities on site. There are locations where the ramps directly head directly into the circulation roadway as opposed to crossing it or they cross behind parking spaces. I'll let VHB kind of walk through their thoughts behind their response. Their response was to provide additional 3 feet behind each parking space to accommodate that circulation. Obviously, the main circulation of pedestrians will be along the path that it does involve crosswalks up the hill. If you look at the site plan, it's kind of that zigzag crosswalk sidewalk that runs down the middle of the property. That does provide crosswalks on across each of the circulation roads. It's more for those sidewalks that run along the circulation road where they would directly lead towards parking spaces where someone may not see the pedestrian if they back up. I would ask Matt to correct me if I'm wrong. I believe the indication was that those particular are not meant to be, I guess, sidewalks that would generally connect, but more of as people are parking in the parking spaces, they have a place to ramp up into a sidewalk. If that were the case, TEC does understand there's not going to be a whole lot of pedestrian circulation on the site based on the nature of the offices all being separate from each other. So TEC would understand that, but I'll let them kind of walk through their thoughts on the way that the sidewalks are the way they are. TEC doesn't necessarily have an objection to what they provided. We just want them to provide that clarification on why they have provided what they have. In terms of that, that's kind of it for the transportation component. There are site plan comments that were made. I know Pete Ellison again is still following up on the responses to those. He was, as said, away on vacation for part of the last few weeks. So I believe that he'll have those answers into the town soon, along with, again, our formal traffic response that will be in the letter format as well. But for that, I can turn it back over to Chris and Matt if they have any follow-up on what I had described. But I'll be here again for additional questions and or comments.
So, Madam Chair, would you like to hear from Mr. Keeley, the applicant's traffic consultant?
Yes, please.
Matt?
I think in the regards to the question that Sam asked about the parking spaces, I would defer to Chris on that one.
Yeah, I'd be happy to answer that.
Go ahead.
Would you like me to share the current plan so that people can visualize the sidewalks?
That would be good.
Okay, so you should be seeing Plan C2.01 layout materials plan from our revised submission material. In general, the sidewalks are designed to provide safe travel from the parking spaces. So these parking spaces will be access to the sidewalk and they'd have access to the unit. And we've distributed the parking around the site to provide adequate parking for each unit. So that, the majority of these parking spaces and sidewalk infrastructure are intended to really load the buildings they're adjacent to. In instances like between building 11 and 12, we've slid the parking spaces forward so that this could be a continuous path and people could walk behind the parking spaces without coming into the road. Previously, that travel path was through the roadway. So this revision allows a continuous path behind the vehicles. Because of the split in the building and the grade change across the site, it really wasn't practical to bring the sidewalks around the front of the parking stalls. We have retaining walls and a drop off and kind of a narrow constraint between the buildings. So it's low volume. We don't expect high turnover in these parking spaces. We feel that a path behind the parked cars is adequate pedestrian circulation and provides an accessible route through the site. Our winding pathway is an accessible route. The sidewalks are accessible and they provide access up to some common space by the pavilion and our green and a connection down to the visitor center, the sales conference area, so that people can walk from the units to that building. Because of the topography, there is a bit of a winding path, but there is a route through the site. Does that answer your question, Sam?
It's hard to find the mute button. Yeah, I mean, again, it wasn't so much of a question as a more of a clarification, so everybody kind of understood the
Mhm.
thoughts behind it. So it wasn't just me, me describing it. Again, TEC doesn't necessarily have a objection to the way it was answered. We understand that the way the ramps enter those parking spaces, it's generally meant to be not crossings, but ability from the parking spaces to get to buildings. Whereas the main path through the middle is supposed to be the just pedestrian path. So TC,
Right.
Again, it's not 100% preferable, it's 99% preferable. It'd be great if we could provide a site that had them all connect and cross like that, but it's obviously the site doesn't necessarily allow for that grading wise. And knowing the use on the site, TEC would find that it's generally, it would be fine the way it actually has been drawn, because it's not meant to be crossings.
Yeah, and these parking stalls are fairly deep. It's a 19-foot stall, and then we have 3 foot behind it. So it's 22 feet from the curb to the roadway, which should provide adequate distance to walk behind the vehicle. And we do agree that it was previously on the original submission, these were apex curb ramps that we envisioned somebody would come out of the car, go into the road, and then come into the sidewalk. And this change provides for space to do that outside of the roadway, the driveway, sorry, the driveway, not the roadway.
Are there different additional comments from the applicant?
Well, I think that's what we had for tonight. If there were questions for our traffic consultant, Matt Keeley, he'd certainly be prepared to respond. I'm not sure that there's anything that remains outstanding, but I could be mistaken.
May I just add too, is that, we invited the property owner. He was gracious enough to agree to attend, who could provide any history that's necessary over certain matters too. I just don't want us to forget him being here as a resource. And thank you, Rob, for being here.
Thank you. And also thank you for his attendance. Well, if there's no further content that's going to be presented by the applicants, let's begin with the individual planning board members. And we will, I'll ask each one of them by alphabetical order to take 10 minutes, if they find that sufficient time, to lay out any additional issues that they have regarding the documentation that has been submitted tonight in advance of the meeting, and items that might have slipped by in our previous visits with you. So with that, let's begin with Clark Brewer.
Yeah, I still think this looks like an excellent project. I mean, I don't know in terms of the marketing and the uptake issues that were brought up at previous meetings, but it certainly seems like an exciting use of an excellent design approach to I'll call it a difficult site. I'm just going to go ahead and say that. I did look at TEC's questions and then the VHB responses, and I still don't quite get how you get to 14,000, or roughly half of the overall, the gross square footage. How you get to half as a net. I haven't seen a detailed calculation of it. There is on page on page 6 under 18, there's a a breakdown of the gross square footage and the net square footage, and it just surprises me that it's half. Now, Sam from our consultant said that he thinks that the parking that's been provided is adequate for what may be needed, and these are, correct me if I'm wrong, 350 square foot office units. So there's roughly one parking space per unit that's set up. And there's a few extras, but that's set up so that these are intended to be single occupant office spaces.
Is this a question?
Yeah, it's a question.
Yeah, I would
one
love
person.
to offer up a screen share for a detailed demonstration of the measurement and how we got there, because it between the conference areas, the landing areas, and the bathrooms themselves, that's how we get to that gross versus net. And I'm not sure if maybe Sevi or Chris might want to demonstrate that. But to answer your question, these are largely intended to be single occupancy, but we view it in the way of the world and the new working model that is unfolding before our eyes, and the flexible nature of people's schedules and how they're working. We view that the parking counts will not be utilized, and I think this was touched upon earlier, to maximum capacity every day.
All right.
Yeah,
I mean, the Sam's suggestion of a reserve area or a flex area, I think is reasonable. And then maybe this is a question for council. If the parking requirement is 1 to 200, and we agree it's based on the net square footage, and we agree with their calculation, then it meets the zoning bylaw requirements for parking for this technology business district. If there's some discussion about what's net and what isn't, but our consultant and the applicant believe that this is the right parking amount for this particular use, we could entertain a waiver for meeting the bylaw exact number. And I think that for the storage facility, we allowed less parking than what would be required for the use based on the table of use, based on the parking use count. That developer made the case for the number of parking spaces, and I've never seen it crowded up there. But with that said, first I would want to see the methodology for the net, and then ask the question, if this is the right parking, whether there's a waiver or not. Can we give a waiver to the zoning bylaws, or would it get tipped to the ZBA?
We can't.
Just a minute, Tom, just a minute. That was directed to council.
Yeah, I know.
I was going to say, I'd have to say, I'm still getting familiar, obviously, with Cohasset's in and outs of your zoning bylaws. Unless there's some explicit language in there. I didn't see it certainly in the site plan review section, but I'd be happy to look through the parking section.
Yeah,
I was going to say, I don't recall seeing an ability to grant a waiver.
Right.
So I think it would actually be a variance from the zoning board if we were going to support some lesser than the required number under zoning.
Right. And I don't know if we have time to go through the number right now, if the applicant wants to do that, but I did have a couple of other general comments.
So Clark, I'd just like to say that until we get through everyone, we won't know whether we have the time. So if you continue with your comments, then we'll see.
Yeah, I'm just gonna go through my kind of mile high comments, and then we can drill down on the details if we have time. So I'm assuming that the traffic counts, peak traffic counts, aren't going to trip a signal we've been talking about signal in this location for a decade or more. And is it safe to assume that Mass DOT is not going to recommend or not go along with a signal at this location? Is that what the feedback you've gotten?
Who are you directing that to?
I guess the developer's team.
Yeah, and I'll take that and bounce it off to Matt. And this is specifically why we asked Mr. Schwant to join us too. There's some relevant history that will probably apply to many other board members' comments as the meeting proceeds.
Okay, well, we'll let that sit then. And then on the handicap accessible spaces, it seems like maybe a distribution. I can see there's a couple at the top of the hill, and a couple at the bottom of the hill that may be distributed enough, and then there's a handicap ramp that connects all the levels. There's no stairs anywhere, so a non-handicap person would have to go back and forth to traverse the site. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and let's see. I had a question, I think, on our first hearing, what the maximum slope is of any of the driveways and whether that meets what's required by the zoning bylaw. And I don't remember offhand what that is, having not checked it recently. So that's another question.
I don't believe the
Max
zoning
slope?
bylaw specifies, the
Max
zoning
slope?
bylaw specifies a maximum slope.
You're saying the zoning bylaw does not specify the slope, maximum slope?
I don't believe
I
so.
could have sworn I saw it, but
It
you know,
could be in the
I'm
subdivision
not
regulations.
I'm not the highest study of the zoning bylaws all the time, but I believe I saw it. If you could follow up and let me know what the maximum slope is on your site, that would be
Yes.
appreciated. And that's all I have for issues right now to review with the applicant and the other planning board members.
Okay, thank you. Clark, it looks to me like you had 5 major points.
Sorry?
It looks to me like you had 5 major points. Is that correct?
I think signal, a waiver
Right,
for
got that.
parking, the parking methodology.
Yep.
And I guess I would add to signal, if not a signal, there may be some enhanced safety measures that could be taken, like right turn only at peak afternoon traffic. So yeah, five issues.
Okay, thank you. Tom Callahan?
My previous concern was with the lot coverage. Trying to find that data amongst this 237-page response. What is the lot coverage?
I think
What
that's
is
the last
it?
page,
The last page.
if my
of
memory serves me
237.
correctly. No, it's
That's-
not. No, it's not. I'll find it.
Yeah. no. Not easy to absorb 237 pages of new stuff. I think there's a single chart you have somewhere with all the zoning compliance, right? Somewhere. That's what I was looking for.
That may not be included in this package because we had submitted that
All right.
previously with our original package.
I mean, I-
36 and 37, or the responses 36 and 37 cover impervious and pervious and lot clearing.
Well, I guess my question is, has our experts verified that? Guess I'm hearing that the response isn't ready yet, so.
So I did find it. It's page 327.
All right. All right, well, I mean, that's my concern about compliance with that requirement. And, just looking at the plan on a piece of paper, it looks like it's far more than 70%, but I know the site's very large as well, so. At what stage, does anybody know at what stage the state is with rethinking the design of Route 3A? I know on the south end of town, they're at the 75% design stage too. I mean, this is not an ideal intersection where they don't square off across from each other. And I'm wondering where the state is on thoughts of a redesign. Does anybody know?
Lauren, do you have any information on that?
I was going to ask if Sam Gregorio had any information on that.
Sure. TEC is working with the town on a planning study right now that looks at a series of 4 major intersections in the corridor between the MBTA station down to the plaza across from King Street. This is one of the intersections being looked at as part of that corridor study, and to see what the recommendations for corridor cross section and intersection alternatives would be at each location. That's again currently in the planning stage. We're obviously looking at the design plans that are more to the south to provide a similar cross section if that were to be the case from what's being designed down there. Obviously, that's being still in the planning phase. We need to get kind of an onboard recommendation from the town eventually when that's complete to provide whatever we want as a recommendation to the state in terms of their TIP process. And then from there, it would go towards the design once Mass UT and the town all agree for what would be the general cross section and alternative intersection alternatives at each of the major locations. So we're still probably at a minimum a few years away from it being anything getting in the ground there. So.
Right. Is when you're dealing with a state highway, is there any prohibition of doing what Clark suggested about restricting left-hand turns? It's either altogether or at certain times of the day.
I mean, it really depends on what the alternative would end up being at the intersection. I mean, if it ends up being something like a traffic signal, you don't have to really worry about that. Or like a roundabout for that matter, if it was that, you wouldn't have to worry about that.
No, I mean, right now, today, while we're waiting for the state to think about a redesign, is there any prohibition doing what Clark suggested by restricting left-hand turns?
Yeah, you would need to get buy-in from Mass UT through a permit process to make any restriction to access indoor egress from any location. Because there's a driveway permit for the subdivision roadway or that would be in place that defines what the access and egress would be, which right now is full access egress. So any change to that would need to be approved by Mass DOT. I don't work for Mass DOT, so I can't tell you what the results of that would be. I can tell you that it may be looked as unfavorable to provide a restriction on any one driveway, because then it becomes a potential issue of, well, what about the driveway next door? What about the driveway next door to that? So not to say that would be the case. There's always a safety issue if there is one that may trump anything, but that would be more of a Mass DOT District 5 making that decision.
Right. Okay. And my last comment is just that it was mention of the need for various fire department approvals. Has the fire department looked at any of this yet? Does anybody know? Anybody?
Lauren, please.
Thank you. I've distributed to the fire department, but I have on my list of things to reconfirm with them that this is acceptable to them.
Okay, yeah, that would be critical to have sooner rather than later.
Yes.
All right, that's all I have.
All right, thank you, Tom. I'm going to go to Mr. Grady.
I don't have any questions at this point in time.
All right, thank you, Mr. Potter.
I'm sufficiently satisfied with everything that's been discussed and the points that have been raised by Clark and Tom so far, and the answers that were given by the applicant. I think they were comprehensive and kind of touched all of the concerns from previous meetings. So I'm good right now as well.
All right, I'd like to ask a few questions. Some of them are just definitions and some of them are specifications relative to the comments that were written back to us based on our original discussion. And some of these are just questions of definition that I don't understand. So if we go to the first page, down at the last item number 3, there's a description here that says the use of traffic volumes from this time period have been conceptually approved. What does conceptually approved mean?
Is that question?
I'm sorry, is that for me or for Sam?
I'm asking, I would say that who is the most appropriate person to respond?
Yeah, if it's a comment posed by TEC, I think it's probably best for Sam to
Okay, thank you.
respond. But if it's our response to that item, I think then Matt, if you could please respond, that's probably the best way to approach this whole letter.
Okay, so it would, then number 3 would be Sam, I suspect.
Sure. Okay, so right now, because of COVID, traffic count really can't be done today or in the last like year and a half, because the volumes would be much, much less than a reality condition, either pre or what we'd hope would be post-COVID, right? So Mass DOT has set forth a set of guidelines that say that you can use only traffic counts within the last 2 years based on for a traffic study. And this traffic study will be, again, the same thing that will go to Mass DOT as part of a permit process. And through MIPA, if that were the case, I don't know if they have to go, I don't think they have to go back to MIPA. But because of COVID, Mass DOT has provided guidance to all the consultant firms that says that traffic counts, more historical traffic counts before 2 years ago, can now be used in certain cases based on the fact that they provide better data than what COVID would be if I counted today with new traffic counts, as long as the old counts are adjusted appropriately for annual growth and seasonal growth based on known data that is available. VHB provided data that was known in the past for these locations more than 2 years ago, but adjusted them appropriately. So the conceptually approved comment or designation that I had in there was to note that the volumes that as used and as adjusted would be approved by MassDOT if it were presented to MassDOT in that case, which is why TEC would generally concur with the methodology they used.
All right, thank you. In your response number 4, you use the term "the data generally indicates." Can you please specify what you mean by "data generally indicates"?
That's for you, Matt. You're muted.
Yeah, I think she meant.
I think it's Sam too.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The applicant provided a certain amount of crash data for each of the location, the location for the intersection outside the site on 3A. This crash data was over the last 5 years, a period, which is the general methodology that's used for reviewing crash data at any one location. What we mean by generally indicates is that there's such a low number of crashes, you usually can't define a trend in crashes if there's no more than like 3 per year. So what we were saying with that is, in the absence of actual other anecdotal data about, a crash that happened yesterday and something that's known to be happened because of it, like let's say there's potholes in the road that cause crashes. The general crash data would generally indicate that there's no crash, there's just not enough crashes.
Okay, thank you.
And that's not to say that the intersection isn't busy or congested. It's just that the potential of it actually being that congested and busy, at least on King Street, just it's the nature that there's not a lot of chance for someone to actually come out and cause a safety hazard because more people are cautious because of the congestion.
All right, thank you. In item 5, you responded by saying the applicant's finding of the conservative growth rate based on both nearby and permanent count stations. Are you thinking in terms of the growth rate? If you look at the population distribution of town and what's happened over the last 10 years, we would think that the area has actually experienced significant growth. So I'm wondering where you arrived at the conservative growth rate.
Sure, and I don't have their particular, I only have my comment letter, not their study in front of me, so I can't look up the exact way they done it, but generally, actually, I can pull it up right now. So the historic growth rate, so based on that, Mass DOT has permanent count stations at various locations throughout the state, actually a lot of locations across the state. So basically these are locations that are continuously counting. There's detectors in the roadway that are just counting every day. And there's actually a website online. You can go and look them up. You can see what the count is tomorrow. Well, not tomorrow, yesterday, the day before, the day before that, the day before that. And these are continuously going year by year by year. So the traffic study basically noted that the count station, the closest permanent count station, which is on Route 3, just north of Route 18, which is generally in a commuter sense comparable to 3A, indicates that the last 10 years is actually a decrease in traffic. This does not include COVID time. So this is before COVID. So what they've shown is they've provided a 1% increase per year as a conservative analysis. They're not going to obviously show a decrease and project a decrease over the future. So VHB is actually showing an increase, which is actually different than what the count station would show, the permanent count stations would show. Now that's not to say that any individual roadway doesn't have an increase, but in the absence of available data, the state does not have a count station on every roadway. So you have to use what's the most comparable type of roadway in the general area. Usually the Regional Planning Commission will be also developing their own plan the same way. And mostly throughout the state, it's generally a 1% growth rate that gets used as the conservative analysis, unless you can, data sufficiently shows otherwise to use something more. Now, over a 10-year like future projection, the traffic study, so that 1% becomes basically, 11 or 12% of growth in the traffic over that time frame, which is doesn't seem like a lot, but that's a lot of new cars added to the roadway when you're already talking about something like 600, 700 in each direction. So if you have like a 700 cars in one direction, that's basically saying that you're adding 70 something cars to the roadway, unrelated to our project or unrelated to this project. So that is a substantial increase in traffic that they're showing as a projection, which is why GEC would say that that's perfectly fine the way they did it.
All right, thank you. On table 1 about the site distance summary, you mentioned that there is a problem with vegetation. But when I think of the driveways that you used, was there any, how does the sight line the stopping sight distance actually get calculated? Because that's such an odd location. It's got a very sharp turn and then it flattens out a little bit and then it, it also takes another turn. And I'm, thinking from a person who drives that on a very regular basis, it is extremely difficult to see at that intersection. And will removing vegetation be sufficient to make it possible so people coming and going are not going to end up in difficult circumstances? Or is there room for some sort of larger than just vegetation transformation, but perhaps even the landscape alteration to pull the hillside back so that there's actually a greater clearance?
Sure. And so there's 2 different site distances. I'll go over the stopping site distance first because that's what you mentioned. Stopping site distance would be the distance along the roadway traveled, so 3A. So that's an equation based off speed, the grade, and it's a combination of basically what would be the perception reaction time distance that you're traveling while you're kind of thinking about what's about to happen, and then the time it takes you to break to 0, if that's ever going to happen based on the speed of the current roadway. So right now, stopping site distance, I believe, is sufficient. It's intersection site distance that's not. So intersection site distance is basically the driver along the subdivision roadway, viewing cars on 3A, and again, taking into account the speed, the type of car that's coming at you, and basically what you can see coming out of the driveway. And that's from a point 14.5 feet back from the shoulder line, which basically would represent the location of the driver eye in a car, a typical car. But that's more than actually probably reality, because a driver eye is usually probably around 8 feet, 7 feet, not 14.5. So as they look down the roadway, there's some vegetation. There obviously the curvature of the roadway is generally the restriction, but it's the the grass, bushes, and stuff like that that are on the roadway. Now the way the side of the roadway is graded comes into play here, obviously, because obviously if the roadway is not graded well, the vegetation is now higher up automatically. So there is a chance, there is to say that there is opportunity to level out the side of the roadway, but it depends on whose property that's on. So I believe that that's not on the public property and or on theirs. So where they aren't necessarily, it's not generally reasonable to ask a particular developer to alter someone else's land when it's not the public right of way. That being said, again, it is an existing condition for a roadway that's already there and approved. So it becomes a kind of a question of, is it the developer's requirement to fix that for a roadway that's already having that condition. That they have really no reasonable reason to change. Like, why wouldn't Easy Storage had to do it? Why didn't the subdivision road had to do it? Why would they do? I guess that would be the generally. I'm not a legal expert, so don't quote me on that as a legal expert, but that's generally the reason why it would generally be seen as unreasonable to do stuff with the land in order to do that. Although vegetation itself and any vegetation that might be in the way is an easy fix to at least extend sightline as far as possible. Now, again, that's for intersection sight distance of the roadway. The general sense is there's a desired intersection sight distance in a minimum recommendation. The minimum recommendation is equivalent to whatever the stopping sight distance would have been on the mainline roadway. So in a general sense, we would recommend that the developer would do any kind of alterations that they can to vegetation within the public right of way or their property, something that they are reasonably can fix within their power.
All right, thank you. And then Mr. Trider?
I just had one quick thing to jump in and add there is that, you know, we recognize that there's some improvements to sightlines that could be made, and we know it's in the interest of the marketability and safety of our site, and it's what we want our tenants to have the best experience possible. So we actually have reached out to the neighbor of the Brass Kettle building, because what's really obstructing sightlines there is signage. If you were to go stand at that intersection or even go on Google Earth and take a left look, you'll notice that it obstructs a good 100 feet, if not more, of sightline. And, you know, we'll do what we can to work with the neighbor on that. And, you know, just to let you know, it's in our mind, and we have made an effort. And as Sam well stated, certain things are outside of our control, but we are cognizant and have made a good business effort to do that.
Thank you. Thank you for that comment. My last comment relates to the way in which you see an individual who might be in a wheelchair transversing the hillside from one building to another. And right now you have it designed as a zigzag. And I'm just wondering, as somebody who works on a very large campus where nobody ever goes on the walks the way you designed them initially, did you experiment with something besides the zigzag? Because it looks physically, first off, it looks imposing, but secondly, it looks like the individual who has to walk is impeded from going from point A to point B in the most expeditious way possible.
So we need to design those slopes at less than 5% in order to be accessible and navigable for somebody in a wheelchair. So what we've done is we've had to add length to the sidewalk and switch back to go up the hillside. There's a significant elevation change across the site. And the way we've designed the slope sidewalk is to make sure that it doesn't exceed the allowable accessible slope of 5%. So that's why it has that extra length.
But do you think that realistically, so what I guess I'm concluding then is that you found a solution. I was wondering if you had thought of alternative solutions to the switchback, simply because you clearly more than one population likely to be occupying the spaces.
Right. So we're not allowed to provide, we have to provide a solution that works for everybody. And if we had a shorter walkway that didn't include those switchbacks, then it wouldn't be accessible. So we'd still have to provide those switchbacks or provide a ramp with handrails. We could go somewhat steeper, but it would be, handrails on both sides, level landings every 30 feet. It would be much more of a structure, and it would kind of enclose you because there would be handrails on both sides.
All right, thank you. Let me ask the planning board members if anyone has further comments, and if they don't, then I would ask Lauren to tee up the public who would like to speak to the project.
seeing no planning board comments, we'll just direct if there's any members in the audience who wish to address the board at this time, if you could input your name and address into the Q&A function. Just seeing the list, I think they're all here for our next agenda item, so I'll pause just for a few moments and then we can continue on. Again, seeing no one from the audience who'd like to comment.
All right, thank you. So based on this discussion, I would like to now ask Lauren to essentially sum up what our options are, given that we've gone through planning board comments and we've had responses from the applicant. It looks to me like we have three options, and I'd like you to tee them up.
Sure. So, well, the primary option for the planning board to determine the sort of this stage in a public hearing is whether you wish to continue and keep the hearing open to accept new information on behalf of the application, or if you wish to close the hearing and move into sort of a deliberation phase. Just from based on the conversation tonight, I would recommend that the board keep this open so for the record that you can continue to receive TEC's final public comment letter, and we can confirm with the fire department their public comment on this so that that can be part of the record. You know, and that's up to the board depending on how they feel comfortable to proceed. I would suggest that after hearing, you know, sort of the comments, I would imagine that this could be sort of this information could be concluded and wrapped up so that we could continue this at our next hearing session. You know, that would allow the TEC to get in their peer review. We can speak to the fire department. And then if there's any further information that the applicant wishes to provide to answer anything that came up tonight, then that would be the time to do so. That would be my suggestion for the board.
Thank you. So with that, is there a planning board member that would like to make a motion? I can't see anyone, so I can't really tell you.
Tom, you're muted.
Motion to continue to, when was that, Lauren?
We will say September 22nd at 6:30 p.m. and the exact time on the agenda will be determined at a later date. I'll communicate with the applicant so that they're aware.
Motion to continue the public hearing to that specific date and time.
May
Second.
I get a second?
Second.
May I have a roll call vote then, please, starting with Clark Brewer,
Clark Brewer, aye.
Tom Callahan,
Aye.
Paul Grady,
Aye.
Eric Potter,
Aye.
Amy Glassman, aye. This will be continued to the 22nd of September, and Lauren will find a time for this to take place.
Right.
Thank
It will
you
be
very
no
much.
earlier than 6:30 p.m.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. And thank you on behalf of all of the presenters and the applicant and also the owner for attending the meeting and for us moving forward. So the next item on the agenda is an informal discussion with Ms. Cassie Rosano and her legal counsel. Ms. Rosano is the owner of the gas station property in downtown Cohasset. In the past, the planning board has had conversations with applicants prior to their initiation of the development process. So Ms. Rosano and anyone else that you have with you here, would you like to join the discussion and essentially take a seat at the table with us?
I'm just going to take a moment. I was just clearing out our previous applicants from our panelist window, and now I'll begin to promote Cassie and her team. So we have Cassie Malatesta, actually, her Rosano was her maiden name. And then she'll be joined by John Danahy, Greg Morse, Theodore Chalukian, and his associate Donahue, I believe, is Jan is here as well with you. And now, Cassie, is Paul part of your team as well?
Yes, Paul, and then a phone number, Lauren, 617-834-6065.
I have everyone here. I don't have a standalone phone number in the audience anymore, but if I see that phone number come back, I will promote them.
Ted, are you good with your
Yes.
audio?
I'm good with my audio. Can you hear me okay? This is Ted Talukian.
We
Thank
can
you.
hear you. All right, thank you. I'll turn it over to Cassie to begin.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Can you guys all hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. Well, we appreciate the time allotted to us to introduce our preliminary vision and improvements to 55 South Main Street. Really appreciate it. My name is Cassie Malatesta. I am from Cohasset. My family's from Cohasset, and I currently reside up on Sawyer Street with my young family, including my 2-year-old son. Cohasset holds a very special place in my heart. I am truly grateful and feel blessed to be part of the revitalization of Cohasset Village. I've partnered with a well-respected, proven developer with an impressive history of developing in both Boston and like-kind communities such as ours in Cohasset. I've spun off from an institutional development platform in Boston to start my own development firm. And groups like the Ad Meliora team, specifically Jan Steenbruge and Paul Sudley, who are present tonight, provide an opportunity to thoughtfully improve upon the site and make a lasting impression in Cohasset with long-term stakeholdership. 55 South Main Street is a location that I personally believe requires special attention and thought, as its improvements will finally bring cohesion and a resurgence of energy. Our team believes that its 21st century vision will not only nod to the village business district design guidelines, but will also bring much needed community benefits, as well as complement existing restaurants, businesses, and foster new retail, modern housing, public green space, and long-term investment for our town. To date, we've introduced ourselves and initiated conversations and feedback from the majority of our abutters. We've also had informal introductions with town officials such as the town manager, planning director, town engineer, as well as director and assistant director of planning and inspections. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to our project team. Ted, do you have access? Yeah.
Yes. Can you see the slide with the?
Yep.
Okay, perfect.
So architect of record, Theodore Tolukian, and his team have put together a brief presentation with the help of Greg Morris of Morris Engineering, Danny He and Osterberg Associates, located just down the street in Greenbush, Situate, as well as others listed on this slide. And they're all here today to answer any questions throughout and at the end of the presentation. So with that, I will let Ted take control of the presentation.
Well, terrific. Thank you. My name is Ted Tolukian. I'm an architect in Boston. I'm joined here with my associate, Donahue Clark. And we're really excited to be a part of this team. Cassie really summarized well, gave a great introduction. And I think the intent of our meeting here tonight is really just to share with you some initial ideas and concepts for the site at 55 Main Street. And hopefully with the idea that expresses our passion to really build on the success of Cohasset that meets the vision that is a part of the Village Business District Design Guidelines. In general, provide a brief overview of the existing conditions, which many of you know well, of course. Outline the existing site plan and zoning parameters from our civil engineer, Greg Morse. And then just go over at a high level our proposed conceptual design at the site plan level and program. And as this is our first meeting, really the intent is to review next steps and really seek guidance and help understand any of the questions that you may have so that we can come back with follow-up that embarks on our planning board application. With that, I'll just give you, this is a quick aerial photograph, and outlined in red is the site itself. It's approximately 20,346 square feet, and it's right in the heart of the Cohasset Village. There's certainly a great scale of buildings and their relationship to the public realm with sidewalks, street trees, really great pocket parks around the perimeter, and really a charming center with both a mix of commercial and residential uses. And we see this site as a great opportunity. It's certainly a former, gas station that we envision that could be, with a responsible development, a part of the context and character of the village center. With that, I'm going to give you a quick virtual walk around the site. And as designers, I think we look to the context as clues for our design process. So these photos are as much a part of, describing the conditions that you all know, but help us understand some of the initial thinking and strengths that exist on the site and really pick up on those clues. The streetscape is quite varied in scale between the red line into the south and 47 Main Street, South Main to the north. And as you see here, the site itself is a bit of a missing tooth between two varied architectural structures. as we move to the west, one of the first things that we did as a team is not just sort of walk around South Main and enjoy the mix of uses, was really remark at what a great pedestrian experience that this path represents, connecting South Main with the public parking. There's some great mature trees, and there's really a great opportunity to activate this pedestrian experience with a mix of residential and retail uses and really build on the success that exists there. James Lane, although paved with for vehicular access, really doesn't have much pedestrian sidewalks. There's an opportunity for really helping to improve universal access around the site for accessibility and for a safe pedestrian experience. And as you move around the site, not much to say with a former gas station and the opportunity that it has to fulfill the village business district guidelines. And the last two images on the bottom of the slide really just show you some of the curb cuts that exist. And they're quite large, of course. They take away to some extent from that pedestrian experience and also for additional on-street parking. And so we really see this as a potential part of the project and the overall vision for the site. So I'm at this point going to turn it over to Greg Morse, our civil engineer, who's going to talk a little bit about the zoning conditions on the site, as well as our initial understanding of some of the setbacks and side and front yard conditions. Greg?
Great, thank you. For the record, Gregory Morse, registered engineer, Morse Engineering. To start off on this project, what we did is we started by doing a complete existing conditions survey, which is what's depicted here on the screen. The property line of this lot is rather unique. It's the black line that's shown in bold around the property. The property is a little less than half an acre in size. It's 20,347 square feet. As we know, it's in the downtown business district. The topography of the lot is relatively flat. It sits approximately 10 feet above mean sea level. There are no wetlands on this property. There are no floodplains on this property. It's developed land all the way around it. And was said, this is a previous gas station site. The entire site, 100% of it, is impervious surface in its existing condition. The site is constrained. It does have 4 easements on it, which we're taking into account with proposed designs here. 2 of the easements on the left-hand side or the west side of the property are for the benefit of the Dr. Pompeo office. There's a sewer easement as well as a drainage easement servicing the Pompeo property. Secondly, along the bottom of the screen, James Lane, or Parking Way as it's otherwise known, the town has a right-of-way in an easement across the property for access from South Main Street. Then lastly, the 4th easement on the property is at the top of the page, or on the north side of the lot, which is a portion of the James Brook Culvert, which traverses the northeast corner of this property. So again, we're taking in all of those easements into account with the setbacks with the new building and parking configurations that we've come up with. As far as zoning, what we've done is we've established that our front yard is obviously going to be facing South Main Street. We will treat that with front yard setbacks with respect to sidewalk and facade. The remainder of the site is largely side yard setback along the northern lot line, a side yard setback along the Pompeo property to the west. We would maintain another front yard setback, however, to James Lane or Parking Way to that southern lot line. And turn it back over to you, Ted.
Oh, Greg, thank you. That, I think, summarizes a lot of the uniqueness of the site. So with that, I'm going to move to just a proposed conceptual plan and highlight probably the 5 major elements on the ground floor that we feel are going to help activate this and really become a part of the core of the village business district. One is we're looking to widen the sidewalks along Main Street by setting back our building, creating alignments to the north with 47 South Main, and also the red line into the south. We're going to be respecting the James Brook drainage easement through the geometry of the building, and also taking advantage of the clues that I walked through on the photographs is picking up on Town Way and improving that pedestrian experience and providing some residential duplexes to the north. Part of that in the description of the photos was also providing that universal access around the site. So in gray, seeing some of the sidewalk expansion that will bring you around the site and is continuously along the perimeter. And at the core of it is going to be what we feel is a great public experience, will be in addition to the core of the Village Business District with a public pocket park, which will have a great adjacency to the commercial space to the east, residential lobby to the north, and then garage parking to the west, which will lead us to underground parking through an automated parking system. The project itself, we've rendered some of the materiality, which I think is really important, of a way to help humanize the pedestrian experience with brick pavers as shown in red, plantings and trees in green, as well as the gray sidewalks, which really show the durability of the accessibility around the perimeter. The project itself is a mixed-use project that will include approximately 19 residential units, picking up on a vibrant mix of studios, 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. We're looking at a range of different commercial units, retail types of experiences, which could range anywhere between 1 and 3 units, depending on the scale of the users, and approximately 25 to 35 underground parking spots and 2 drop-off spaces along James Lane, which could be for pickup and drop-off, as well as access to the public park over time. Greg did touch a little bit about the district zoning, and to begin with, we're going to highlight the 3 special permit requests that we'll be seeking. The project is approximately 1.73 FAR, which is less than 2.0, and we're requesting that through the special permit. Our coverage under the table of area regulations will be less than 80%. We plan to be compliant through the use of porous pervious materials with the brick pavers and the planters. And with the pocket park and a lot of the plantings and treescapes is really having a great amount of green space, which is approximately 10%, which is a great amenity, not just to the tenants and the people in the building, but also to the general public. The building height, primary parapet roof line we're seeking will be less than 35 feet. And the front yard setback, which as Greg described as 2 locations along South Main and James Lane, is going to be 15 feet along James Lane, and then in alignment with the diverse structures on either end of South Main Street, which is understanding able to be reviewed under the special permit. The side yard setback, we will maintain 10 feet along the north and seek 5 feet under special permit, which will be protected through a fence and plantings, as well as a path leading to the pedestrian pedestrian pathways. From a parking point of view, with the underground parking, we'll be looking to have more than 1 space per unit under the zoning section 71L, as well as seeking, we will not be seeking any commercial parking because the project is within 500 feet of a public parking lot under section 71K. So in general, there's a lot of community benefits for the project, which I highlighted, not just the vibrant mixed use versus a former gas station. Certainly what we love is activating that public park and providing the continuous access along Main Street and Parking Way. There's a real opportunity to reinforce those street patterns with widening the sidewalks, providing street trees. And so the building is much a part of the architecture, but it's the landscape that's going to help really stitch this into the context. As we move forward in the further phases, we're looking to provide increased transparency at the ground floor with active storefronts and outdoor seating. And by removing those 2 large curb cuts, we can allow for 2 to 3 more on-street parking spaces for the general public. And additionally, with the degree of off-street parking is really as an amenity to provide that for the residential units themselves. And certainly as we move through this, taking a lot that is primarily bituminous material is looking to improve that with our drainage mitigation strategies that we'll continue to study and work with Greg Morse on. The underground itself will be served through automated lifts that will serve the parking themselves. And the upper levels, as we discussed, will still getting sorted out in terms of their unit sizes, but a great opportunity to provide a mix of, you know, 1s and 2s and 3-bedroom units that have access on all sides of the property for a lot of transparency with windows and balconies and diverse roof lines that we believe will feel a real rich part of the context. And then ultimately, which is I think a lot of the New England charm, being a New England person, you know, all my life, is, you know, these rooftop cupolas and walk around porches really spirit a sense of the seaport area being part of the waterfront, is making that connection back with a common wraparound porch or roof deck area that we will continue to study. But ultimately, you know, the guidelines that you've put together, I want to say, have been a tremendous source of inspiration for us. They really capture the experiences that we believe in and feel that can be a part of this village design areas. And we wanted to take this as an opportunity to hear more about that from you, but also highlight some of the goals that we really feel connected to, which is on one hand, preserving and enhancing the historic and cultural district itself, but also strengthening it with a mix of uses, moving away from a former gas station into a vibrant sense of active retail storefronts and residential uses will really help make it really an experience that will be for everyone. And promoting diverse housing alternatives means a lot to us, not just with the mix of units, but affordability. And that's something that our design team with ownership will continue to discuss with you as the project continues to unveil. Certainly in the next phases where we propose the massing and the materials, I was particularly drawn to the section on the creativity and variety in the architecture, and more importantly to the sensitivity of being respectful to the scale and the character that makes Cohasset so special. And that's something that we really look forward to discussing in more detail. And just as a core of our practice is not just designing, you know, sensitively to materiality and scale, but thinking very progressively about sustainability, our carbon footprint, energy consumption, and being close to the water, also resiliency, not just from a point of view of storm and water, but also from extreme changes in temperature. And that's something that we continue to study and pursue in all of our projects. And as we pointed out around the perimeter is really that enhancing that pedestrian and public way and creating sensitive connections to our context that promotes a really civic sense of responsibility. And so with that, you know, we look forward to this being just an introduction. Certainly gives you a sense of where our interests lie and an understanding of the density, and also understanding of the sensitivity that we like to take to our adjacencies. We'd like to open up for any questions that you have and seek guidance from you as we move forward in the next phase. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It was thorough, and I feel that it's a very good introduction to a very important change possibility within the town. What I'd like to do now is to go alphabetically by the individual planning board members and ask if they have any comments at this time. And then I will ask Lauren to reintroduce the way that the public can participate if they so desire to make comments. So with that, Clark Brewer.
Yeah, so it's really exciting that this site is being looked at, and it's going to be an opportunity to kind of knit the village fabric back together again instead of having a lot of cars, some of them not working, and an activity that is useful. I guess, you know, we're there's less and less garages, but I still think this is a special site and there are a lot of opportunities, which it seems like you're focused on. I did have a couple of comments, and one was, I think, Ted, you said studio, you were looking at possibly studio apartments, and I think a range of sizes is good. The bylaw does, I think, have a minimum of 750 to 1,500 maximum for the village. You haven't said anything about affordability, but you know, if you're over 5 units, there's an affordability component. And there may be an opportunity to buy down additional units that would be affordable if that's amenable. Were you going to be doing sales or rentals for the residential, or haven't you decided yet?
I think Cassie probably answered this well, but I think it's still in a review, correct, Cassie?
Still in review, Clark.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Because you know, there's a benefit to the housing count if the unit count gets tipped to 25%. I'm sorry. Yeah, 25%. For rentals, all the units count. That's why the buy down mechanism can leverage all the units for our subsidized housing inventory. So that's something to consider.
And Lauren did introduce us to the chair of the Affordable Steering Committee, so we will start those conversations with them shortly.
Yeah, great. But you know, I guess I would suggest, you know, in terms of the scale, the overall scale of the site, there's I'm sure you're going to employ ways to sort of break up the overall mass of the elevation to kind of relate to the street scale of what's typical in the village. But I think, you know, your first pass, it looks great. This is potentially an exciting project for knitting the village back together. Thank you for coming to bring it to us. And I would say if you have any questions in the planning stages, you can come back to the planning board for informal more than once.
Thank you, Clark, for your comments.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Right, thank you. Tom Callahan?
I also am very happy and excited to see this site get redeveloped. My concerns, just as it does get redeveloped, is, of course, first making sure the gas tanks are removed correctly. I don't know what your plan for that is and what involvement you need.
They have been removed.
They're gone now?
Yep.
Really? Okay. Well, we'll just want to, I guess, our engineers see what was done and make sure it was all done.
Of course.
I'm concerned about the structural integrity of the culvert, the James Brook culvert. I know you're not building on it, but you're building next to it and digging next to it. So that's going to have to be very carefully done. I will give you a, you know, I don't know, the property line, I believe, goes right down the middle of James Lane, but I do know that the two previous owners of the gas station and the hotel at one point were involved in a massive discussion, argument about the property line and property rights in James Lane. So just be sure you're on top of that and have touched upon that. And John, I see you. Hi. Hello, John. How are you? The other thing is, I'm glad to hear you're referring to the village design guidelines, because I very much want you to strictly follow those. The other thing is, you know, just pay very close attention to the bylaw, and particularly 18.1A1.
Tom, can you please look at the screen?
I'm trying to read the thing correctly. Right. So look at the bylaw, Article 18. What I heard is a project that's going to be in excess of the allowed floor ratio, and which is fine. That can be dealt with by special permit, but I thought I heard somebody say that one of the setbacks would be less. That cannot be dealt with by special permit. It clearly says in that bylaw that it has to be dealt with by variance. So I would just, John, you'll know that to read the bylaw very carefully about what it requires. And then I'm also obviously concerned about affordability, and I didn't hear that. I truly hope that, well, there's going to be a requirement for affordable units, but I would also hope that the price points of these things not be extravagant. That's not what this town needs. As Cassie knows, I've discussed many times. So.
No, of course.
So no, overall, though, I'm excited to see it. I think it the parking and the underground, I think it presents some challenges, but I know Greg will be able to tackle all of those. So.
All right, thank you. Paul Grady?
No, that was an excellent first presentation. So I'm sure we'll have questions down the road, but as of right now, it was a nice presentation. Look forward to seeing something in place of that gas station. And so I'll leave it for later, but thank you.
All right. Eric Potter?
I myself thought it was one of the best presentations we've had to start off a project. If they were all done like that, I think it would make everyone's lives a lot easier. It was just well put together. Really explained things, laid everything out, answered a lot of preliminary questions that we all would have had, allowed us to see things from the ground as they now exist, and also gave a great overview of what's going to be happening if this project gets approved down the road. I myself think that this is a critical point in the village. I obviously am sympathetic to price point, but I think that this is something where, what's most important here is getting the best project, overall project put in place there that's going to be viable for not only the developer, but it's going to be one that makes the village more vibrant and attracts more people down there. So I think that's really what's critical here. And I think the original design really is great, with the commercial space being right there on the street, and you have that big lot in the back. So I was fairly impressed to start things off here, and I know there's going to be the challenges that everyone discusses, but great job coming out of the gates.
Thank you, Eric. Appreciate it.
Well, with that, I'd like to make just a couple of comments. I think given that the CHI team has gone through a lot of some of the technical issues associated with questions of elevation and putting in an underground garage and things like that, that there could be some possibility of learning that's available to you because of their experience. And I know that when we were doing our conditioning, we were addressing directly the question about underground parking and the elevation at 10 feet. If we had a surge of 11 feet, you got a problem. And so just starting with what they discovered might actually make it easier on you to figure out how to move forward with that idea, because it clearly would be great, right? I mean, that is because even though we have a town parking lot, there are still times when it's full, and there are also going to be people that live there and they might want their car undercover rather than out in the weather. The second thing is I was wondering about the possibilities of and maybe I wasn't reading the diagram correctly, of there being so it looks to me like there's really two elevations in the project, or two potential elevations in the project. The elevation at the street face, on Main Street, and then stepping back to where the residents would be, where is it all one story, or is there going to be a two-story back residential area?
So at the first floor, there are some grade changes, of course, between South Main as you move to the west, and it's a few feet. And I think what we'll find is that along Townway, where the pedestrian path is, those residential units may step a little bit in order to get up to that level, but they're not a dramatic shift in height. It's really consistently all the same plane with some slight, grade changes that are occurring that will adjust the finished floors. And then the second floor would be, continuously at the same height.
I was just thinking, do you imagine there being a two-story residential area as a part of the back of the building rather than a single story?
Yeah, that's something we'll continue to study. And I think
but Ted, so the duplexes on the public way, those would be the two-story living. Is that what you're referring to?
That's what I was wondering.
Oh, I apologize for misunderstanding you. I thought it was more of a massing question. Oh, yes.
Because I think it's perfect. You can actually do the massing in the back and it's not going to have the same oppressive feeling.
Yeah. No, I think when we walk down that pedestrian path, it's really great. And there's a really charming way of moving through there. And to have some stoops and some gardens and some green space and some brick pavers and have duplexes could really make that, I think, enhance that experience and could be quite tremendous.
Great, great. Do any of the planning board members have any further comments? If not, I will open it up to the public, and I would only ask that each individual consider that if someone has already made a comment like you would like to make, so that we don't stick around in the meeting too long, if you would just hold it and potentially send it to us in a note. So are there any planning board member further comments?
It's Caleri might be on the line if you want to ask him.
Or that might be the person that Cassia mentioned that was potentially calling in.
Okay.
Oh, that was Ted's cell phone, but.
Hi, good evening.
Yeah, there he is.
Oh, there he is. Okay.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening,
Coming out of
Madam
the
Chair.
shadow. Where are you?
Yeah, I'm out of the shadows now.
Okay, you're a little bit delayed in speech sound. Sounds like he's rolling down a hill slowly. Let's see. There was a signal there he sent us. So maybe we should send him an email that says we can't hear it.
Paul's gonna have to submit comments in writing.
Electrical thing. So, like others.
Yeah, it's gonna be tough wherever you are.
We can't
Yeah, we
hear
can't.
you, Paul.
Paul's on mute now.
Would you like to send him a note, Lauren, to ask him if he wants to write into the chat?
Well, he's driving a car right now, so I don't know if he's the best.
Okay, so he shouldn't be doing anything. So
there he is, he's giving a thumbs up. So
okay, so why don't we open this up to public comment, and again with the proviso that if something's been said already, then you can send us a note again to verify that you also believe that.
certainly. So I'll just state for the record, the only attendees we have are Angela is still with us, and we have a Jeff Evans in the audience. If you'd like to comment, you don't have to comment, there's no pressure, but if you wish, if you could input your name and address into question and answer, we can take your comment. And we'll pause for a few moments.
And Jeff is actually part of the team, Lauren.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay, so then never mind. We don't have any members in the audience, so seeing no public comment, I would imagine we can move forward.
Okay, it's funny because I didn't know how many people were actually with us.
I didn't either.
Right? I was going, well, that's a lot of people. All right, well, I don't think there's any sort of formal way that we conclude these conversations other than to say thank you very much, as everybody indicated, for making a nice presentation, and we look forward to working with you as time goes on. And we will see you in the future.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for your feedback and commentary. Really appreciate it, and looking forward to next steps.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
All right. So we have concluded the public business of the meeting, and we now have administration that we need to take account of. And I'd like to first give Lauren the opportunity to talk about special town meeting, because that's an item that we're going to be working with for the next couple of months, and we want to pay very close attention to that. And then beyond that, we'll go just down a list of members' comments, items not anticipated, and approval of minutes if we have them.
All right, great. So just so we're all aware, December 13th, 2021 has been the date set for special town meeting. I just received the calendar today. By September 24th, which is a Friday, we will need to internally have the deadline to submit our notice of intent, which is something that I typically handle. It's just an administrative sort of small piece of paper that goes to the select board office and holds a place in the warrant. So we will plan at our next meeting on September 22nd to have an informal discussion about zoning articles. And then after that discussion, I will submit the articles of intent and we'll plan our public hearings. I see Tom has his hand raised. I'm just gonna,
I just, from our meeting last time, the zoning working group has since met, and rather than 6 articles, we're planning to only bring forward 3 at this time. That would be the zoning board's wish to do the single lot exemption change. There would be the change to definitions of frontage, common driveway, and streets. And then the third one would be the ledge protection article. The harbor article we're putting off, the height definition one we're putting off, with the understanding that John Hallen's employing it as policy in the meantime, but we're putting those off. So that's it about that.
all right, thank you. And then so what we'll need to do after we have an informal discussion and the articles of intent are submitted, we need to hold our public hearings in October, because the last day for committee review is November 1st. So typically we have our public hearings, we close them, the planning board makes a recommendation on articles, and then we go to advisory board and select board to present and get their recommendations for the warrant. So that's how this goes. So what I would plan to do in terms of scheduling is, after our informal discussion, we would open our public hearings for this on October 6th. If need be, we have October 20th to continue. But other than, if we closed on the 6th, then we'd proceed then to advisory and select board later in October. Either way, we will. So that's a plan for special town meeting. And what I'll be preparing for you as we sort of move through this is a sort of chart. We had done this a while back, talking about zoning articles, just so we have sort of an upcoming calendar of cycles of special town meeting and articles that are sort of floating out there that we're considering. So I'll reorganize that. I'll coordinate with Katie Dugan so that we have zoning bylaw working group concepts all in this, and then we can start planning for sort of cycles of upcoming town meetings.
What was the third item, Tom?
So the 3 articles would be one on amending single lot exemption. The second one would be the 3 definition changes to frontage, common driveways, and streets and ways. And then the third article would be ledge protection, which was, the promised step 2 of the clearing article we did last town meeting. So the text of those, just so everybody, just need tiny, the ledge protection one needs tiny tweaking, but I will probably circulate that to everybody, if not this week, early next week.
All right, thank you. So we'll look forward to that. Other comments about what Tom presented and Lauren presented? All right, so then let's move on to members' comments on committees and liaison updates. I think Tom has covered the ZBA.
Yeah, just the one other thing from the last meeting is about the 2 regulations that we were going to take up this fall. After our meeting, Woody and Katie had some additional edits. I will circulate those perhaps as early as tomorrow. My suggestion, if we're going to do the zoning article public hearings on October 6th, that we target these regulation public hearings for the second meeting, whichever date that is in October.
So what happens with regulations when we do have a public hearing, or how does that work?
Well, we have to note it. We have to notice it in the paper twice, so we need the time to do that. We have the public hearings. We discuss them, pros and cons. We can edit them as we go, like we do a decision. And Carolyn, jump in and correct me at any time. And then we vote on them that night, and they become effective. So it's truly that simple. But like I said, the other 2 added some tweaks, so I'll just circulate them again. And again, we have the freedom during that public hearing of making further amendments amongst the 5 of us if we wish.
All right, thank you. That's good information. Let's see. Eric Potter, have you attended your committee assignment?
God, I have, yes. That was just a quick one though last week. So it was really nice. It was great. We got to meet the members on the committee. Paul did a great job of just introducing everybody, letting us know what our expectations were. So it was nice to be able to do that. Yes. Nothing of substance yet though.
All right, great. Paul Grady?
No, I haven't, because I don't even know when they are. Otherwise I would. I don't even have a schedule when they are, to tell you the truth.
Which committee is he on?
CPC.
Which one?
CPC.
What's
Community
that?
Preservation Coalition. Yeah, so it's from Russ Bonetti's the chair, and I will connect the two of you. He's been waiting to get appointments to fill the seats so that they can meet. But let me connect the two of you.
Well, thanks, Lori.
Yeah, I mean, if they have an article for this fall town meeting, you'll be busy October, November, but you likely might not do anything of real substance till next spring.
Who, me?
Yeah, I mean, the CPC as a whole, they only are active when they tend to have projects being brought to them, so.
Well, if it's spring, that's not bad for them. That's when my business slows down a little bit. Then we
Yeah,
get.
no, they're always busy at annual town meeting, and it depends if anybody's got an application for funds in the pipeline for this fall town meeting. So if they do for the fall, you'll be busy the next 2 months, but that's about it.
All right, great. So good luck on that one, Paul. Clark?
Lauren,
Do you want to say something to Lauren?
I said, thank you, Lauren.
I'll connect him with Russ so that he knows.
And again, I've met Russell, so.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Great. Clark?
Yeah, so I'm on the Elm Street corridor working group. And we did have a meeting this afternoon. There's been a couple of designs that have been put together and evaluated, and feedback and surveys. And so the consultant's working on an updated design. And Lauren, when do you think the next public meeting is going to be?
I'm anticipating at this point, either probably early October,
Right.
if I had to be realistic.
So we'll have something to look at. I think the consultant does want to get feedback and input from the planning board and the select board, and cast a wide net for feedback on the design approach and the details.
All right. Lauren, would you comment on any of the grants that we have applied for and what their status is?
Sure. So just a reminder, we're waiting to hear. The One Stop for Growth is it's the first year the state has unrolled this sort of collaborative opportunity for grant applications. It's one portal that covers a variety of programs that used to be standalone through the state. We submitted an application, 2 this year, actually. One was for subsequent funding for Elm Street corridor to move into the next phase. Assuming that completion of this happens in the fall, we can then move forward with, sort of the 25% design alternative. The other request for funding that we submitted was for actually funding to help us with the zoning redraft and reorganization. That is something that the zoning bylaw working group has been looking at, and the select board, actually, as they've been formulating their fiscal year 22 goals, has been one of the identified items of interest. So we anticipate that we will hear from the grant program in October. And of course, we're hoping that both of these items are awarded. Otherwise, we'll need to seek alternate opportunities for funding.
All right. I don't know why I've been making that much noise. I don't really have anything to report for economic development. I do have only a minor thing to report that probably does relate to economic development, but it hasn't been circulated within the Economic Development Committee. And that is that there are 2 programs for coastal resilience that we've identified that have a lot of flexibility for certain kinds of funds to look at resilience related issues that might be presented to the town. And as we all know, we've been experiencing increasing climate variation, and these resources are designed to provide the possibility of planning, community organizing, some consulting funds, and also it is sort of it starts as a pipeline toward more funds for physical capital expenditures. I haven't been invited to a economic development committee meeting in a while. So Lauren, have you any update from the economic development folks?
So I believe actually that coming out of, again, the select board fiscal year 22 goals, they've been sort of refining, and now they're really kind of kicking into overdrive this last 2 weeks, setting into plans what they'll be doing. And part of some of their goals are, in terms of the zoning redraft, it also talks about the village revitalization, looking at a comprehensive village, talking about thinking like parking, economic development, all of these items. So I think the next step is that sort of task force may sort of morph into a group that's focusing in on the village. I anticipate that coming next. And that was actually one of my things on my to-do list, to pick up with actually Corey Evans from the select board after Labor Day. So it is now after Labor Day, and I'll put that back on my list.
All right, great. And that concludes, Paul Coolieri, if he's still here.
I don't think he's here.
I don't think he's still here. So we will hear an update from the Affordable Housing Committee when he gets back. So the next item on our agenda is items not anticipated 48 hours in advance. It does not appear that anyone has anything to offer. All right, so then let's move on to, do we have approval of minutes, Lauren?
Don't believe we have sets of minutes to approve tonight. So let's table that until our next meeting.
All right, thank you. So can you give us a preview for the next 2 meetings? And one thing that I think everybody might be interested to know, we've not had a whole lot of business in the planning department for the last couple of weeks, which is quite weird, since we've been used to being inundated and literally running from a fire all the time. Lauren, do you have any idea why all of a sudden the pipeline dried up? I mean, some people argue that it's because of the cost of material, other people talking about the inability to access labor pools, but do you have any further insights about that?
No, I don't. I only have my own hypotheses. I think there's, of course, well, first of all, summer. I think that we did see a slowdown in summer with the lift of the previous year. People, I think just our applications we are anticipating a higher uptick this upcoming fall, though. We've already had some sort of informal discussions, and as you saw tonight, some projects that we know are coming down the pipeline. So we'll see, and I'll continue to keep you updated on that. I see Paul Grady has his hand raised on this item.
Yeah, just a point. Amy, because you said that, you do know this is all going to blow up in our faces and we're going to get swamped again. I just wanted you to know that. So you put it out there.
I definitely know that, actually.
Let's all knock on wood.
It actually, as a matter of fact, it started to become a psychological problem when there wasn't anything going on. We were all trying to figure out what had we done wrong, or maybe we were all going to go to jail at once. We weren't sure which one. Okay, so what do we have for the 22nd and October 6th so far?
So September 22nd, we'll continue the site plan review for 808 Chief Justice Cushing Highway. We'll also continue the site plan review for Situate Hill, the one that we heard tonight. We have an informal discussion about the zoning articles, as we touched on. And then actually what I anticipate will be coming to us is, if you all recall back when we were talking about 124 and 87 Elm Street, the Placid Harbor Inn site, there was a discussion about easements for access, sort of reciprocal easements. It had gone to annual town meeting in 2020. This is sort of the crossing of that, completion of that item. They've been negotiating this with council on behalf of the select board, because as you may recall, annual town meeting granted the select board the ability to do this with 2 conditions regarding parking and the planning board approval. So what's been decided is that this will come back to the planning board for an informal review, and then it will go back to select board once planning board has had a chance to look at this. So we'll be trying to queue that up for the 22nd. Beyond the 22nd, we now have our public hearing for the zoning articles for special town meeting. And then on October 20th, we'll target our public hearing for the common drive regulations, the 2 regulation items that Tom mentioned. And then other than that, we don't have anything immediately pressing. Like I said, anticipating additional application receipt, but at that point, we're moving into late October, November scheduling.
All right. Whoa, thank you very much. I don't know why there's feedback. Somebody must have a phone open.
On 808, has everybody seen the state highway design? Because they're pretty far along, and I think we have to take it into account for our decision.
We asked them to find out what was going on and try and dovetail their design with what's on the updated state highway drawings.
Yeah, I hope so.
They were supposed to find it.
It's much further along on that part of 3A than it is on the north side of 3A. So.
Yeah, I looked over the materials and found that they're still in rough form. Clark Brewer?
Yeah, we probably shouldn't be talking about a continued hearing.
I just suggested everybody read it.
I'm happy to make a motion to adjourn.
Happy to second it.
All those in order: Clark Brewer,
Aye.
Tom Callahan,
Aye.
Paul Grady,
Aye.
Eric Potter,
Aye.
Amy Glassmeyer, aye. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Angela, and thank you, Carolyn, and welcome to your first meeting. We will see you.
Good night.
Pleasure to meet
Thank you, folks. Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
At all.